Hello and welcome once again to this online English learning program, an initiative by Director School Education Jammu. Today's lesson is for class 10 students. So let's get started. We all know about scientists, don't we? Scientists in fact are very important people of our society. They help us in many different ways. Do you know the name of any scientist? Any Indian scientists? Or any other scientist of the world? Well, if you do know the names of some scientists, then it's great. But if you don't, I have a task for you. Make a list of 10 scientists of the world. Make sure to include the names of some Indian scientists as well in your list. You can search the internet, you can read books, you can talk to your elders and make a list where you list some scientists, at least 10, and also how they contributed to the world. What was their greatest contribution? Right. So, after this, we'll start our today's topic. So, our today's topic is a story of a scientist who discovers how to make himself invisible. Is it possible at all? We can't say anything unless something is really discovered or found out. So this was the scientist who one day discovered that he could make himself invisible. Did it remind you of something? Have you ever read about something, about a person? Have you ever watched a film about somebody who could make himself invisible? When I was young, I watched a film, a Bollywood film. A man finds a device, a watch, that could make him invisible. I'm sure many of you have also watched the same film. So there are many things on this subject where a person becomes invisible. We have a similar story here. So our today's topic is Footprints Without Feet, a story by H.G. Wells. So this is Herbert George Wells, or H.G. Wells, a great English writer, has written many novels, short stories, and other works of social importance. You can read more about him on Wikipedia or many other such websites. Now let's talk about the story itself. So before we talk about the story, here are a few points that I want you to remember. You can always check the meanings of those new words later in a dictionary, but when you are reading, you don't have to stop and look up those words in a dictionary. You can always guess their meaning from the context clues, from what is written before and after that word. That will give you some idea about the meaning of the word, and that is good enough. You can move forward. So, you have to read the text at home. Don't expect your teachers to teach each and every word from a book and then explain it to you. That's not going to help you. That won't improve your reading a bit. If you want to improve your reading, you have to read at home. And not only your textbook, but all the other kinds of reading material which are available to you, newspapers, magazines, blogs. So this is how you improve your reading. For this story itself, Footprints Without Feet, you have to read it at home first. After that, you can watch this video again and this will help you a great deal. So we were talking about a scientist. The scientist in this story has discovered how to make himself invisible. But how can a man become invisible? And when he becomes invisible, does he use his discovery or misuse it? Now, this is a very important question. Science gives you a lot of power. But if you use this power for the welfare of human beings, then it's good. Otherwise, it can be very, very dangerous. So we'll see how the main character in the story, our scientist, whose name is Griffin, uses his power of invisibility. So this is how the story starts. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh, muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? Now this next paragraph explains this mystery. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he. Now, unlike Mr. India, Griffin doesn't have a choice. He can't become visible again. He has become invisible permanently because he had swallowed certain medicines, certain drugs, which have made his body completely invisible. So he can't become visible again. So what to do? So this, if you read this paragraph, you can see what he was up to. So when he was spotted in London by those boys who were following his footprints, and he wasn't visible at all, from there he escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. And remember, Griffin could become invisible only by removing all his clothes. So he had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Now London is a cold place in winters. Wandering in streets without clothes is not at all possible. And it was in this situation that Griffin had found himself. So invisibility was not really helping him out. So what did he do next? Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. So in the store, Griffin found a lot of things. He found food to eat and he didn't have to spend a penny on it. He found clothes to wear. Remember, he was very cold. He found shoes, overcoat, hat, everything, and he became a fully dressed and visible person. He went to the kitchen of the restaurant. He found meat to eat, coffee. He ate sweets and wine, had wine from the grocery store. And finally, when he was all Satisfied, he settled down to sleep on a pile of coins. This was when the store was already closed. The storekeepers had gone home. He slept in the store during the night. But the next morning, he couldn't wake in time. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well, if only. But this didn't happen. And he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving, the shop assistants. So when he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. Now he was a visible person. Remember, he was wearing clothes. They naturally gave him a chase. They followed him, and in the end again, how could he escape? He was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. Cold January air, remember. London, January. Very difficult. Now the next time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Remember, when he was wearing clothes, only the clothes were visible. Not his hands and his face between the hat and his coat, for example. Those areas were not visible. So he decided to enter the store of a theatrical company. Now, London used to have a lot of theatres in the past. Even now, there are many theatres in London. And when there are theatres, there will be companies, there will be stores who provide them with costumes, other kind of things used in theatre, So this kind of a store now was chosen by Griffin to enter. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages around his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind. He attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him all the money he could find and then ran away from there. So you can see how the things are turning up. This scientist, who is supposed to have helped the world, who is supposed to have helped humanity with his discoveries, is actually robbing people of their money, is actually attacking people, hurting them. So this is not something we expect from a scientist, from anybody in this world. If you've got power, that doesn't mean you'll be hurting people. Everybody has a right to live in this world with dignity, with respect. So this is what Griffin didn't do. This is not what he did, and because he was doing something which could have been easily spotted, he decided to leave the crowded London. So he took a train to the village of Epping, where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn. Now, inn is like a hotel. Now, this village was a very small one, and usually there were no visitors during winters. So it was an unusual event for the people, for the villagers. And when a man of such uncommon appearance comes at a very odd time, people would talk. It set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, she tried to be friendly with Griffin, but Griffin had no desire to talk. So she was satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist. Eccentric. Crazy. And of course, he had paid her in advance. Mrs. Hall had no problem, and she was ready to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. He was a man of quick, short temper. But of course, the stolen money would not last long. It doesn't last forever. You should know that. Everybody should have a permanent and legal income of earning. The stolen money doesn't last. So Griffin had to make some excuses. He pretended that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment, so he would be able to make payment to Mrs. Hall for the rent. But after some time, a curious episode occurred. In the clergyman's house, the clergyman is the priest of the church. He and his wife were one day awakened by noises in the study. When they went downstairs, they heard the noise, the chink of money. When the coins strike with each other, they make a sound which can be called chink of money. And they could hear the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. So without making any noise and with a poker grasp, poker is a kind of metal stick, grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. "Surrender!" But to their amazement, the room was empty. They looked at the desk, under the desk, behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. The clergyman was so shocked that he kept saying, "The extraordinary affair," the whole day, for the rest of the day. Oh, extraordinary affair. He couldn't believe his eyes, what he had just seen. But we know what was happening. We know who was taking the money, and we know what really happened in that clergyman's study. What was this curious episode that happened in the clergyman's study? We know that. So another episode happened which can be called more extraordinary than what Mrs. Hall observed in the behavior of her furniture later that morning. When the landlord and his wife, when they found when Griffin's room open, they were surprised and they tried to inquire the things. But when they entered the room, they were taken aback. Suddenly, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear, and a moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Now, Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. When such unusual things started happening in the village, people asked for explanation. Mrs. Hall went to the scientist and asked him, "I want to know what you have been doing to my chairs upstairs," she demanded. "And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room." Griffin was already short-tempered. He became furious this time. "You don't understand who or what I am?" he shouted. "Very well, I'll show you." And suddenly he threw off the clothes he was wearing and everything. But in the meantime, Mr. Jaffers, who was the constable who had been sent for, arrived and tried to arrest a headless man. And he was quite surprised. But he said, if a magistrate ordered a man to be arrested, then that man had to be arrested with or without his head. But after that, slowly, Griffin became completely invisible, and Mr. Jaffers found himself struggling with a man that he could hardly see. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. In the end, Jaffers was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of "hold him," but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free and no one knew where to lay hands on him. So this was your story. I read it more than I should have, but I still hope that you will read this story right from beginning to the end yourselves, and then do the second reading if it is required, and after that try to study the questions that follow on your textbook. So we'll do this. We'll discuss some of the most important questions right here, and some issues and the structure of the story, and of course the setting. And now let me ask you some questions, very short questions, and see whether you can answer them or not. Where is this story set? What is the place? What is the setting of the story? Where does the story happen? Name of the city or the place, do you remember? So the answer is London. And then the small village called Epping, or Iping for that matter. What is the name of our scientist? Griffin, of course. Fine. What is the big discovery of Griffin? Yes, he has discovered how to make himself invisible. Do you rate Griffin as a good scientist or a bad scientist? Of course, he is not a good scientist. He is a bad scientist. We don't need such scientists, of course. We need good scientists, scientists who work for human welfare, who work for the humanity, who work to make our lives better. So that's all for today's lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll come back with another lesson. Till then, goodbye. And stay home, stay safe, and wash your hands regularly. Thank you very much.